Hi, my name is David Galperin, otherwise known as Davie, the host for Mental Health brought to you by A Day in Davie's Brain. I wanted to make an episode telling you a little bit about who it is that I am and why it is that I'm here. As a child, I dealt with a lot of emotional trauma and violence. Later in life, I experienced 9/11. And then more currently, what I deal with is trying to overcome the trauma of war. I spent 40 plus years in survival and guilt. It felt like it was a downward spiral that kept me so angry, so resentful, and so enraged. Throughout that time, I had numerous frightening situations that occurred. However, there's been only a chosen few situations that truly made me feel like submitting to death. Well, I'm no expert at life or most of the things that we will discuss. It is simply my sense of curiosity that drives me towards certain points of view. And hoping that by sharing some of my experiences and some of my ideas, it will maybe tweak and change a little bit of somebody else's mindset as well. And perhaps help them along their enlightened path in life as well. I was born and raised in Soviet Ukraine. Being a kid that was mostly of Jewish descent, someone that spoke Russian and went to a Russian school in Ukraine, I would say my life was far from cozy at that time. My mother wasn't around much during that time as she was out trying to make ends meet. I had to spend a lot of time on the street all alone, having to learn through a much tougher schooling measure. And that made me face adversity very early on in my life. I got picked on, I got beat up, I got abused, I got mocked, I got bullied, discriminated against, etc. Every unpleasant situation taught me something, and it made me change like a chameleon. I guess at that time, being a victim wasn't something that was even a thought in my mind. It didn't seem to be a part of my existence. To adapt, I had to learn a lot of adult life skills at a very young age. Learning how to hustle and stay alive was a necessity during that time to navigate through that brutal and unforgiving communist society. At 11 years old, my mother and I were granted political asylum and migrated to the United States. During this time, the Soviet Union came apart at the seams, and the transition coming from the Soviet Union to the United States was difficult and extremely confusing for a kid. We settled in New Jersey, and we're living in a very rural part of the state, which as an immigrant, I had to deal with quite a bit of discrimination there as well. I was completely isolated by other children. And once again, I had to go and learn adult life skills and survival skills to navigate through a whole new culture. I had no friends at that time. I had just about zero social interaction. So I used television to learn English. And considering that just about every time I went outside, I got picked on and beat up, my mother's boyfriend at that time thought that perhaps it was a good idea to put me in karate to help me to defend myself a little bit so I wouldn't get picked on as much. I never knew I was gifted before then, before I started to fight. And once I figured out how to subdue some of my rage and learn to defend myself, nobody wanted to mess with me after that. So in the process, I guess, through it all, I ended up learning some discipline, some humility, some patience, some self-control, and some respect. And in combination of all those things, it kept me alive, it kept me out of trouble most of my life, and it based my personality as you see me in front of you today. Being a persistent individual, all I wanted to do was get my black belt so I could compete and beat up other gifted fighters. To be a great fighter, one must know what it's like to be an animal without fear of losing anything. And that is when you embrace your pain, you let your pain become an ally. You're not afraid to lose because there is nothing to lose other than taking the blow to your ego. I saw no future in the sport and decided to dedicate myself to books and education instead. College was tough. Up until that point in my life, I've kind of based everything on my physical gifts. And even in college, all I wanted to do was spend my days in the gym. Even partying wasn't a priority. On party days, I was the one that was walking the drunk girls home to ensure their safety at the end of the night. A few years went by, and I remember on one beautiful sunny morning, I was getting ready for class. My dorm room was open, as it usually was, and I remember my neighbor from across the hall was yelling in disbelief as it appeared that one of the Twin Towers got hit by a plane in New York City. Considering we weren't that far from New York, I stepped outside of my dorm and saw the smoke rising above the tree line of our campus. September 11th, 2001 has drastically changed my future from that point forward. As I know, it has influenced very many lives of other people as well. A year later, on September 12th of 2002, I signed my contract with the U.S. Army, and by October 2nd of that same year, I was heading to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for basic training. Being a college graduate with really good scores coming into the military, I declined being an officer and decided to work my way up through the ranks within the Army. Regardless of my modest approach to my military service, I became a radio operator and an airborne soldier within the ranks of 1st Special Forces Group Airborne, which is where I served out most of my active duty enlistment. After deploying to Iraq in 2006 and suffering from trauma of war and combat, at 27 years old, I decided to get out and pursue other career choices, which shortly after that, I was stop-lossed and pulled back in for another 3 years of service. From that point forward, I felt utterly hopeless and completely alone. As the diagnosis continued to roll in from Department of Veterans Affairs, I completely submitted to the courses of treatment for many, many years for physical injuries, traumatic brain injury, and post-traumatic stress. A few years ago, the VA started pulling my meds. I don't know if it was due to their policy changes or other reasons that they had at that time, but the drastic symptoms and withdrawals that I had to deal with were extreme as I was yanked off of my pain meds, psych meds, even hormone replacements that I was undergoing during that time. My anxiety became so unmanageable that I developed uncontrollable tremors and debilitating, crippling panic attacks. Just about every day when I would wake, I would crawl out of bed onto the floor and just peel off my wet, soaked clothes as I would lie under a fan trying to cool off while I just shook and shook and shook. And I remember thinking, repetitive thinking over and over, how no matter what, I need to find something other than medication to give me another chance at life. My life felt unbearable at this point. I was highly emotional, and extremely reactive. Just about every moment of my life felt like I was a caged animal that paced back and forth in their hot, undersized cage. As I completed my third divorce, I decided that it was time for a change, to find some balance within myself. And then I started feeling this major shift from within. Up until that point, I've been like Alice in Wonderland. I would dive headfirst into the darkness. So I did what I do best and dove deep, deeper than I ever have before. That's when other people started showing up, asking questions. My approach to life has always been try to find a way to fly directly into the sun face first. And that is a very dangerous thing to do for most people. But the ones that survive, they get such a vast amount of knowledge that one cannot buy or simply read in a book. Most people either love me or hate me. They can't simply walk away and say that I'm just okay, which at the end of the day, they come back for more. A lot of these people were coming to me as if they were trying to live vicariously through my life experiences. But then eventually they started to come and ask me for life advice. Eventually people started asking me if I ever thought about being a therapist. I look at life in a more philosophical way rather than psychological, so I didn't quite think that that was my calling in life. As I implemented mindfulness and gratitude in my daily routine and practice, it allowed me to see everything in a more neutral way, which also allowed me to see the world as a far less complex model as well. Being a person that's been given the chance to see life through many different lenses, I decided to share some of my experiences and insights in hopes that creating this online community can help other men feel not so alone at the end of the day, no matter what they're going through. By supporting one another, we can feel a little bit better. And why do I know that? Well, because throughout the last couple of years, I've developed my own tribe of people around me, and they support me for me, and I support them for them. There is no judgment, as there is nothing to judge. Essentially, all we do is accept one another for who we are, because at the end, we are all in it together. I'm not here to sell you a product or tell you what to do. I'm simply here to share some of my ideas and information in the hopes that you will get a sense of support behind you. And I encourage every one of you to come leave me some comments. Tell me what you guys think. Let's learn from each other as well. Through comments, I challenge you to come show me a different way other than mine. By doing so, we can shed a light on some of these other individuals that just simply haven't found their own path. We can add some other options and tools for them to use in difficult situations that they simply didn't have before. After all, being uncomfortable isn't something that we have to suffer through. You just have to switch your mindset and understand that being uncomfortable is a tool. It's a stepping stone for you to learn and grow. Most of this information comes from my ideas and my perspective, which I've accumulated through a lifetime of experiences and studies. I welcome your input. Perhaps with all our ideas together, we can help each other see the world in a new and more constructive way. Let's learn from each other and support one another. I want to thank you for being here with me today, for following me into the spiral of my mind. This is Men's Whole Health, brought to you by a day in Davie's brain. And as always, I want to remind you, if you change your perception, you will change your life. I'll see you next time, my friends.